It's on the
They're your gifts to yourself now. You can't see them.
You know, I'm not mad about it.
Oh, shucks. I can't give you all this chocolate. Oh, dear. What a shame.
No,
Oh, well.
it's all mine. I'm just hiding in my cabinet, so I don't eat all of it today.
Yeah. How fantastic.
I'm hoping this is going to have to last me through quarantine, so it could be a long time, so I need to really be careful with not eating it all today.
Yeah.
You have to realistically hide chocolate from yourself to find later, because I definitely found a chocolate bar like that recently.
Good. You got to prepare yourself.
It's going to be my new way to tell time, because time has lost all meaning. It's going to be, I remember that was the Punasiat Mariat week.
Like Japanese eras, but with chocolate bars.
Yes.
I like this new system of time telling. I might adopt it.
That's assuming that, you know, a chocolate bar might last you a week. You know, it's hard to imagine that one type of chocolate will last you a uniform, right? Exactly.
And a week now is like a decade in normal time.
Yeah, like the different types of chocolate will last different amounts of time. Like
the licorice chocolate lasts forever.
Yes, it does.
Licorice.
Salmiakki.
Me too.
But have you had salt licorice?
No.
I love salt licorice.
It's pretty good.
Salt licorice.
Pretty good. I keep thinking I won't like it, but it's quite tasty.
Yeah. That's salty and sweet, isn't it? Like, what's not to love?
Licorice.
Sweet menthol taste.
You could have salted caramel instead.
What's that, Liv?
Salted caramel is salty and sweet and has no horrible licorice in it.
That's good. Salted caramel is good.
Licorice is so good.
It is. I'm with you, Frankie. The enemy.
Sorry, I'm just so excited today because, as I was saying earlier, I'm on the computer now rather than the pad, and I can see everyone. It's so crazy. It's like...
wave at Gordon. Hi,
Gordon.
Gordon.
This is the best. I don't need to swipe anything. It's great.
Revelations.
Malcolm, you look so snuggly.
Oh, let's see, where's Malcolm? I haven't swiped through and seen everyone yet.
So I'm on a cozy couch.
I keep forgetting about your naked face.
I don't.
I think you alarm me every time I see you.
Yeah. Who is that?
And handsome, but just different.
Kind lies.
Has anybody else discovered the... What?
What?
Just heard Lisa and Jonas whispering to each other, and I wanted to know what they were whispering about.
Is it licorice and pudding?
Put the subtitles on them, we can hear what they're saying.
So jealous.
Oh, it's pudding.
There you go. Oh, it's pudding.
I'll hide it out of shot.
Come on.
Jonas the bastard.
Come hide it.
Finally, his formal title.
The bastard of West Sheffield.
It's a freaking great name.
I don't know actually. Is that relevant to your locale in Sheffield? Is it not north? You're north of the river.
Which river?
Yeah, that one.
Oh yeah, way north.
Yeah.
You're north of the Thames, right?
Way north.
They said they're north of the Witch River, which is where all the witches are.
Oh,
Oh yeah, you want to be north of the witches.
and that's how they fill their cauldrons, from the Witch River.
I want that to be in the next installment of the story.
Well, when someone writes it.
Speaking of stories, segue. How are we doing for time? And do we want to start thinking about starting? Yeah.
Before we do, I just love how international it is tonight. We've got
Very good.
Canada, America, Spain, and Germany.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Ireland.
Ireland, sorry.
Ireland. So, like, you know.
Oops.
And the Independent Republic of Newcastle.
And the soon-to-be independent Scotland, probably.
Hopefully.
All right. So we also have Portugal.
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 Portugal, yes.
Anyone else?
That's so cool.
People's Republic of South Yorkshire.
Frankie, look how many people you brought together from all over the world.
So many.
We love listening to you.
Oh no, don't, because I will cry.
Also,
Give me your
Zach's living
tears.
his best life like right now. Look at him. Glass of wine and dark chocolate.
Yeah. Oh, Zach, I'm so glad you went for the wine. Zach messaged me. He was like, should I have tea or wine for story time?
Oh.
How did you feel like you had input?
How about wine?
Yay.
I'm glad I got the answer right.
The answer is always wine, isn't it?
No.
No, sometimes you need both.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes the answer is definitely tea.
I'm currently on tea because it's 1 p.m. in California right now, so
Okay.
that's me. But
I may have had an Irish coffee with breakfast this morning because, you know,
I mean, why not?
why not?
Amazing.
That's a great idea.
Quarantine style.
Jimmy Carr was advocating having Baileys and crunchy nut cornflakes.
Ooh,
That sounds quite tasty.
that
That
does
sounds
sound
amazing.
quite tasty.
I think you should try.
Disgusting, but tasty.
That's what I like.
That's my stage name.
That's a recommendation also.
Right,
Story time?
silly people.
Story
Shall we have
time.
some story time?
Sorry.
You sure? You sure? We don't have to. I could just
Yes.
put
Yes.
this aside. We could, you know, get rid of it. We don't have
Stories, yay.
Oh, all right. Only because you've been good. Okay. Now, are you all sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Oh, before I do begin, I had a quick look through, and I think there are potentially 4 chapters that would make sense to kind of do tonight. One of them is very short, the second one's very short. So I'll do 3, and then we can have a little bit of a pause and see what time it is, see how people are feeling, if they want the 4th chapter, or if people want to just leave it. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Are you sitting comfortably? Now I'll begin. The Contortionist's Tattoo, London, September 1885. Approximately once a month, there are not quite regularly scheduled midnight dinners that are most often referred to by the guests as circus dinners. They are a nocturnal amalgam of social event and business meeting. Madame Padva is always in attendance, and one or both Burgess sisters are a staple. Mr. Barris joins them as often as his schedule will allow, as he travels quite a bit and is not as flexible as he would prefer. Mr. A.H. appears rarely. Tara remarks that they seem to have more productive post-dinner meetings when he is there, though he offers only occasional suggestions as to how the circus itself should be regulated. On this particular evening, only the ladies are present. "Where is our Mr. Barris this evening?" Madame Padva inquires, after the Burgess sisters arrive on their own, since he commonly accompanies them. "He's in Germany," Lainey and Tara chorus in perfect unison, making Chandresh laugh as he hands them their glasses of wine. "He's tracking down a clockmaker," Lainey continues solo. "Something about commissioning a piece for the circus. He was quite enthused about it." Tonight's dinner has no scheduled entertainment, not even the standard piano accompaniment, but entertainment arrives unannounced at the door nonetheless. She gives her name as Tsukiko, though she does not clarify if it is her first or last name. She is small, but not tiny. Long midnight black hair is artfully knotted in elaborate braids upon her head. She wears a dark coat that is too large for her, but she carries herself in such a way that it seems to hang like a cloak, and the effect is rather elegant. Marco leaves her in the foyer, waiting patiently beneath the looming gold elephant-headed statue, while he attempts to explain the situation to Chandresh, which, of course, results in the entire dinner company filing out into the hall to see what the fuss is about. "What brings you here at this hour?" Chandresh asked, perplexed. Stranger things have happened at La Maison Lefebvre than unexpected entertainment, and the pianist does sometimes send a replacement when she is unavailable for a dinner. "I have always been nocturnal," is Tsukiko's only response, and she does not elaborate as to what twists of fate brought her to this spot at this time. But the smile that accompanies her cryptic sentiment is warm and contagious. The Burgess sisters beg Chandresh to let her stay. "We are about to sit down to dinner," Chandresh says with a frown, "but you are welcome to join us in the dining room to do whatever it is you do." Tsukiko bows, and the smile appears again. While the rest of them file into the dining room, Marco takes her coat, hesitating when he sees what lies beneath it. She wears a thin wisp of a gown that would likely be considered scandalous in other company, but this gathering is not easily scandalized. It is more a delicate swathe of red silk held in place by a tightly laced corset than a proper dress. And it is not the relative insubstantiality of her clothing that causes Marco to stare, but the tattoo that snakes across her skin. At first, it is difficult to discern what it is. The shower of black marks that curls around her shoulder and neck, ending just above her cleavage in the front and disappearing behind the laces of her corset in the back. It is impossible to tell how far beyond that the tattoo travels. And upon a closer look, it can be discerned that the swirl of the tattoo is more than simple black marks. It is a flowing waterfall of alchemical and astrological symbols, ancient marks for planets and elements all emblazoned in black ink upon her fair skin. Mercury, lead, antimony. A crescent moon sits at the nape of her neck, an Egyptian ankh near her collarbone. There are other symbols as well, Norse runes, Chinese characters. There are countless tattoos, and yet they meld and flow into one design, gracefully adorning her like an elegant, unusual piece of jewelry. Tsukiko catches Marco staring, and though he does not inquire about it, she says quietly, "It is part of who I was, who I am, and who I will be." And then she smiles and walks into the dining room, leaving Marco alone in the hall, just as the clock begins chiming midnight and the first course is served. She slips off her shoes by the doorway and walks barefoot to an area near the piano that is catching the best light from the candelabras and the chandeliers. At first, she simply stands, relaxed and calm, while diners regard her curiously, and then it becomes immediately clear what her style of entertainment is. Tsukiko is a contortionist. Traditionally, contortionists are either front-bending or back-bending, depending on the flexibility of their respective spines, and their tricks and performances are based upon this distinction. Tsukiko, however, is one of the rare contortionists whose flexibility is equal in both directions. She moves with the grace of a trained ballerina, a detail Madame Padva notes and mentions in a whisper to the Burgess sisters, even before the more impressive feats of agility begin. "Could you do such things when you were a dancer?" Tara asks her, as Tsukiko pulls a leg up impossibly far over her head. "I would have had a much busier social calendar if I could," Madame Padva replies with a shake of her head. Tsukiko is a consummate performer. She adds the perfect flourishes, holds positions and pauses for the ideal amounts of time. Although she twists her body into unimaginable and painful-looking positions, her beatific smile remains in place. Her modest audience forgets their conversation and their dinner as they watch. Lainey remarks to her sister after the fact that she was certain there was music, though there is no sound at all save for the rustle of silk against skin and the crackle from the fireplace. "This is what I've been talking about," Chandresh says, hitting the table with his fist, suddenly breaking the charmed silence. Tara nearly drops the fork that she's been holding idly in her hand, catching it before it clatters onto her plate of half-eaten vermouth-poached oysters. But Tsukiko continues her graceful motions unfazed, though her smile increases noticeably. "This?" Madame Padva asks. "This," Chandresh repeats, waving at Tsukiko. "This is the precise flavour that the circus should be. Unusual yet beautiful, provocative while remaining elegant. This is kismet, her coming here tonight. We simply have to have her. I will not accept anything less. Marco, get this lady a chair." A place is set for Tsukiko. Her smile is bemused as she joins them at the table. The conversation that follows involves more creative coercion than outright job offer, and there are several deviations into the subjects of the ballet, modern fashion, and Japanese mythology. After 5 courses and a great deal of wine, Tsukiko allows herself to be persuaded to accept an invitation to perform in a not yet existent circus. "Well then," Chandresh says, "we are set as far as contortionists go. That's a start." Shouldn't there be more than one?" Lainey asks. "An entire tent, like the one for the acrobats?" "Nonsense," Chandresh replies. "Better to have a single perfect diamond than a sack of flawed stones. We'll make a showcase of her, put her in the courtyard or something." The matter is considered settled for the moment, and throughout dessert and after-dinner drinks, the only subject discussed is the circus itself. Tsukiko leaves a card providing information as to how to contact her with Marco as she departs, and she soon becomes a fixture at the circus dinners, often performing before or after dinner so as not to distract the guests during the meal. She remains Chandresh's favourite, oft-referenced criterion for what the circus should be. Horology, Munich, 1885. Herr Friedrich Thyssen receives an unexpected visitor in his Munich workshop, an Englishman by the name of Mr. Ethan Barris. Mr. Barris admits that he has been attempting to track him down for some time after admiring several Thyssen-crafted cuckoo clocks, and was pointed in the right direction by a local shopkeeper. Mr. Barris inquires as to whether Herr Thyssen would be interested in making a special commissioned piece. Herr Thyssen has a constant stream of custom work and tells Mr. Barris as much, indicating a shelf of variants on the traditional cuckoo clock that range from simple to ornate. "I'm not certain you understand, Herr Thyssen," Mr. Barris says. "This would be a showcase piece, a curiosity. Your clocks are impressive, but what I am requesting would be something truly outstanding, das Meisterwerk. And money is absolutely no object." Intrigued now, Herr Thyssen asks for specifications and details. He is given very little. Some constraints as to size, but still rather large, and it is to be painted solely in black and white and shades of grey. Beyond that, the construction and embellishment is up to him. Artistic license, Mr. Barris says. Dreamlike is the only descriptive word he uses specifically. Herr Thyssen agrees, and the men shake hands. Mr. Barris says he will be in touch, and a few days later an envelope is delivered containing an excessive amount of money, a requested date of completion some months away, and an address in London for the completed clock to be shipped to. It takes the better part of those months for Herr Thyssen to complete the clock. He works on little else, though the sum of money involved makes that arrangement more than manageable. Weeks are spent on the design and mechanics. He hires an assistant to complete some of the basic woodwork, but he takes care of all the details himself. Herr Thyssen loves details, and he loves a challenge. He balances the entire design on that one specific word Mr. Barris used, dreamlike. The finished clock is resplendent. At first glance, it is simply a clock, a rather large black clock with a white face and a silver pendulum. Well crafted, obviously, with intricately carved woodwork edges and a perfectly painted face, but just a clock. But that is before it is wound. Before it begins to tick, the pendulum swinging steadily and evenly. Then it becomes something else. The changes are slow. First, the colour changes in the face, shifts from white to grey, and then there are clouds that float across it, disappearing when they reach the opposite side. Meanwhile, bits of the body of the clock expand and contract like pieces of a puzzle, as though the clock is falling apart, slowly and gracefully. All of this takes hours. The face of the clock becomes a darker grey and then black, with twinkling stars where the numbers have been previously. The body of the clock, which has been methodically turning itself inside out and expanding, is now entirely subtle shades of white and grey. And it is not just pieces, it is figures and objects, perfectly carved flowers and planets and tiny books with actual paper pages that turn. There is a silver dragon that curls around part of the now visible clockwork, a tiny princess in a carved tower who paces in distress, awaiting an absent prince. Teapots that pour into teacups, and minuscule curls of steam that rise from them as the seconds tick. Wrapped presents open, small cats chase small dogs. An entire game of chess is played. At the centre, where a cuckoo bird would live in a more traditional timepiece, is the juggler. Dressed in harlequin style with a grey mask, he juggles shiny silver balls that correspond to each hour. As the clock chimes, another ball joins the rest until at midnight he juggles 12 balls in a complex pattern. After midnight, the clock begins once more to fold in upon itself. The face lightens and the clouds return. The number of juggled balls decreases until the juggler himself vanishes. By noon, it is a clock again, and no longer a dream. A few weeks after it is shipped, he receives a letter from Mr. Barris, offering his sincere thanks and marvelling at the ingenuity of it. "It is perfection," he writes. The letter is accompanied by another exorbitant amount of money, enough for Herr Thiessen to retire comfortably if he wished. He does not, and continues to make his clocks in his Munich workshop. He thinks no more of it, other than a passing thought of how the clock itself might be doing, and where it might be, though he assumes, incorrectly, that it remains in London. Particularly when he is working on a clock that reminds him of the Wunschtraum clock, which was how he referred to it during the more troublesome parts of its construction, uncertain whether or not it was a dream that could be realised. He does not hear from Mr. Barris beyond that single letter. Auditory. London, April 1886. There is an unprecedented gathering of illusionists in the lobby of the theatre. A gaggle of pristine suits and strategically placed silk handkerchiefs. Some have trunks and capes, others carry bird cages or silver-topped canes. They do not speak to each other as they wait to be called in, one at a time, referenced not by name, given or stage, but by a number written on a small slip of paper given to them upon arrival. Instead of chit-chatting or gossiping or sharing tricks of the trade, they shift in their seats and cast rather conspicuous glances at the girl. A few mistook her for an assistant when they arrived, but she sits waiting in her chair with her own numbered slip of paper, 23. She has no trunk, no cape, no birdcage or cane. She is dressed in a deep green gown with a black puffed sleeve jacket buttoned over it. A pile of brown curls is pinned neatly upon her head under a tiny and feathered but otherwise unremarkable black hat. Her face maintains a semblance of girlishness in the length of her eyelashes and the slight pout of her lips, despite the fact that she is clearly too old to be properly called a girl. But it is difficult to discern her age, and no one dares inquire. The others think of her as the girl regardless, and refer to her as such when they discuss the affair after the fact. She acknowledges no one, despite the barely concealed glances and occasional outright stare. One by one, each illusionist's number is called by a man with a list and a notebook, who escorts them through a gilded door on the other side of the lobby, and, one by one, each returns to the lobby and exits the theatre. Some last only minutes, while others remain in the theatre for quite some time. Those with higher numbers shift impatiently in their seats as they wait for the man with the notebook to reappear and politely call out the number on their respective slips of paper. The last illusionist to enter the gilded door, a rotund fellow with a top hat and flashy cape, returns to the lobby rather quickly and visibly agitated, flouncing through the exit back onto the street, letting the theatre doors slam shut behind him. The sound is still echoing through the lobby when the man with the notebook reappears, nods absently at the room, and clears his throat. "Number 23, Marco says, checking the number on his list. All the eyes in the room turn as the girl rises from her seat and steps forward. Marco watches her approach, confused at first, but then the confusion is replaced by something else entirely. He could tell from across the room that she was lovely, but when she is near enough to look him in the eyes, the loveliness, the shape of her face, the contrast of her hair against her skin, evolves into something more. She is radiant. For a moment, while they look at each other, he cannot remember what he is meant to be doing, or why she is handing him a piece of paper with the number 23 written on it in his own handwriting. "This way, please," he manages to say as he takes her number and holds the door open for her. She bobs the slightest of curtsies in acknowledgement, and the lobby is abuzz with whispers before the door has fully closed behind them. The theatre is massive and ornate, with rows upon rows of plush red velvet seats. Orchestra, mezzanine, and balcony spreading out from the empty stage in a cascade of crimson. It is empty save for two people, seated approximately 10 rows back from the stage. Chandresh Christophe Lefebvre sits with his feet propped up on the seat in front of him. Madame Anna Padva sits on his right, pulling a watch from her bag while she stifles a yawn. Marco emerges from the wing of the stage with the girl in the green dress trailing close behind him. He gestures for her to move to the centre of the stage, unable to take his eyes from her as he announces her to the mostly empty theatre. "Number 23, he says, before descending a small set of stairs near the proscenium and hovering by the edge of the front row, pen poised over his open notebook. Madame Padva looks up and smiles, tucking her watch back into her bag. "What's this, then?" Chandresh asks, not directing the question at anyone in particular. The girl does not respond. "This is number 23, Marco repeats, checking his notes to make certain the number is accurate. "We're auditioning illusionists, my dear girl," Chandresh says rather loudly, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Magicians, conjurers, etc., etc. No need for lovely assistants at this time." "I am an illusionist, sir," the girl says. Her voice is calm and low. "I am here for your auditions." "I see," Chandresh says, frowning as he looks the girl over slowly from head to toe. She stands perfectly still in the centre of the stage, patiently, as though she has expected such a reaction. "Is there something wrong with that?" Madame Padva asks. "I am not entirely sure it is appropriate," Chandresh says, eyeing the girl thoughtfully. After all of your pontificating about the contortionist. Chandresh pauses, still looking at the girl on the stage, who, while comparatively elegant, does not appear particularly unusual. That's a different matter, is all he can manage as to his reasoning. Really, Chandresh, Madame Padra says, we should at least let her show off her skills before arguing over the appropriateness of a female illusionist. But she has so much more sleeve to hide things up, he protests. In response, the girl unbuttons her puffed sleeve jacket and drops it unceremoniously on the stage by her feet. Her green gown is both sleeveless and strapless, leaving her shoulders and arms completely bare, save for a long silver chain with what appears to be a silver locket around her neck. She then removes her gloves and tosses them one by one onto the crumpled jacket as well. Madame Padva gives Chandresh a pointed look that is met with a sigh. Very well, Chandresh says. On with it. He gestures vaguely at Marco. Yes, sir, Marco says, turning to address the girl. We have a few preliminary questions before the practical demonstration. Your name, miss? Celia Bowen. Marco records this in his notebook. And your stage name, he asks. I don't have a stage name, Celia says. Marco notes this as well. Where have you performed professionally? I have never performed professionally before. At this, Chandresh moves to interrupt, but Madame Padva stops him. Then, with whom have you studied? Marco asks. With my father, Hector Bowen, Celia answers. She pauses for a moment before adding, though perhaps he is better known as Prospero the Enchanter. Marco drops his pen. Prospero the Enchanter? Chandresh removes his feet from the chair in front of him and leans forward, staring at Celia as though he is seeing a completely different person. Your father is Prospero the Enchanter? Was, Celia clarifies. He passed last year. I'm sorry for your loss, dear, Madame Padva says, but who, pray tell, is Prospero the Enchanter? Only the greatest illusionist of his generation, Chandresh says. Used to book him whenever I could get my hands on him, years ago now. Absolutely brilliant, completely mesmerized every audience. Never seen anyone to match him, never. He would have been pleased to hear that, sir, Celia says, her eyes briefly glancing over to the shadowed curtains at the side of the stage. I told him as much, though I haven't seen him in ages. Got very drunk with him in a pub some years back, and he went on about pushing the boundaries of what theatre can be, inventing something more extraordinary. He probably would have loved this entire endeavour. Damned shame. He sighs heavily, shaking his head. Well, on with it then, he says, leaning back in his seat and regarding Celia with a considerable amount of interest. Marco, pen in hand once more, returns to his list of questions. Are you capable of performing without a stage? Yes, Celia says. Can your illusions be viewed from all angles? Celia smiles. You are looking for someone who can perform in the midst of a crowd, she asks Chandresh. He nods. I see, Celia says. Then, so swiftly she appears not even to move, she picks up her jacket from the stage and flings it out over the seats, where, instead of tumbling down, it swoops up, folding into itself. In the blink of an eye, folds of silk are glossy black feathers, large beating wings, and it is impossible to pinpoint the moment when it is fully raven and no longer cloth. The raven swoops over the red velvet seats and up into the balcony, where it flies in curious circles. Impressive, Madame Padva says. Unless she had him concealed in those gigantic sleeves, Chandresh mutters. On the stage, Celia crosses closer to Marco. May I borrow that for a moment? She asks him, indicating his notebook. He hesitates before handing it to her. Thank you, she says, returning to the centre of the stage. She barely glances at the list of questions in precise handwriting before tossing the notebook straight up into the air, where it turns over end, and the blur of fluttering pages becomes a white dove flapping its wings and taking flight in a loop around the theatre. The raven caws at it from its perch in the balcony. "Ha!" Chandresh exclaims, both at the dove and the expression on Marco's face. The dove swoops back down to Celia, settling gently on her outstretched hand. She strokes its wings and then releases it back into the air. It lifts up only a few feet above her head before wings are paper once again, and it topples quickly down. Celia catches it with one hand and gives it back to Marco, whose complexion is now a few shades paler. "Thank you," Celia says with a smile. Marco nods absently, not meeting her eyes, and quickly retreats to his corner. "Marvellous, simply marvellous," Chandresh says. "This could work. This could most definitely work." He rises from his seat and moves down the aisle, stopping to pace thoughtfully in front of the orchestra pit by the footlights. "There is the matter of costuming her," Madame Padva calls towards him from her seat. "I had only considered formal suits. A similar sort of gown might do just as well, I suppose." "What manner of costume do you require?" Celia asks. "We have a colour scheme to work with, dear," Madame Padva says, "or lack thereof, rather. Nothing but black and white. Though on you a full black gown might be a bit too funereal." "I see," says Celia. Madame Padva stands and moves down the aisle to where Chandresh is pacing. She whispers something in his ear and he turns to consult with her, taking his eyes off of Celia for a moment. No one is watching her except Marco as she stands perfectly still on the stage, waiting patiently. And then, very slowly, her gown begins to change. Starting at the neckline and seeping down like ink, the green silk is turning a murky, midnight black. Marco gasps. Chandresh and Madame Padva turn at the sound, just in time to witness the creeping black fade into snow-bright white at the bottom of the skirt, until all evidence that the gown was ever green is gone. "Well, that makes my job much easier," Madame Padva says, though she cannot conceal the delight in her eyes. "Though I think perhaps your hair is a shade too light." Celia shakes her head, and her brown curls deepen in hue to a near black, as glossy and ebony as the wings of her raven. "Marvellous," Chandresh says, almost to himself. Celia simply smiles. Chandresh leaps up to the stage, taking the small flight of stairs in only 2 steps. He inspects Celia's gown from every angle. "May I?" he asks, before carefully touching the fabric of her skirt. Celia nods. The silk is undeniably black and white, the transition between the two a soft fade of grey, distinct fibres visible in the weave. "What happened to your father, if you don't mind my prying?" Chandresh asks, his attention still on her gown. "I do not mind," Celia says. "One of his tricks did not go entirely as planned." "That's a damned shame," he says, stepping back. "Miss Bowen, might you be interested in a somewhat unique employment opportunity?" He snaps his fingers and Marco approaches with his notebook, halting a few paces away from Celia, his stare moving from her gown to her hair and back, spending a considerable amount of time in between. Before she can respond, a caw echoes through the theatre from the raven still perched on the balcony, watching the scene in front of him curiously. "Just a moment," Celia says. She lifts her hand in a delicate gesture at the raven. In response, it caws again and spreads its large wings, taking flight and swooping towards the stage, gaining speed as it approaches. Descending quickly, it dives, flying straight at Celia and not wavering or slowing as it reaches the stage, but approaching at full speed. Chandresh jumps back with a start, almost falling over Marco as the raven crashes into Celia in a flurry of feathers. And then it is gone. Not a single feather remains, and Celia is once again wearing a puffed-sleeved black jacket, already buttoned over her black and white gown. In the front of the orchestra, Madame Padva claps. Celia bows, taking the opportunity to retrieve her gloves from the floor. She's perfect, Chandrash remarks, pulling a cigar from his pocket. Absolutely perfect. Yes, sir, says Marco behind him, the notebook in his hand, shaking slightly. The illusionists waiting in the lobby grumble when they are thanked for their time and politely dismissed. Another chapter? Stratagem, London, April 1886. She's too good to keep out in the crowd, Chandrash says. She simply must have her own tent. We'll put the seats in a ring or something, keep the audience right in the middle of the action. Yes, sir, Marco says, fiddling with his notebook, running his fingers over the pages that had been wings only minutes before. Whatever is the matter with you? Chandrash asks. You're white as a sheet. His voice echoes through the empty theatre as they stand alone on the stage, Madame Padva having whisked Miss Bowen off, peppering her with questions about gowns and hairstyles. I'm fine, sir, Marco says. You look awful, Chandrash says, puffing on his cigar. Go home. Marco looks up at him, surprised. Sir, there is paperwork that needs to be done, he protests. Do it tomorrow, plenty of time for such things. Tant Padva and I will take Miss Bowen back to the house for tea, and we can sort out the particulars and paperwork later. Get some rest, or have yourself a drink, or whatever it is you do. Chandrash waves a hand at him absently, the smoke from his cigar trailing in bobbing waves. If you insist, sir. I do insist. And get rid of the rest of those fellows in the lobby. No need to see a bunch of suits with capes when we've already found something far more interesting. Quite attractive too, I should think, if one's predilections run in that direction. Indeed, sir, Marco says, a blush creeping into his pallor. Until tomorrow, then. He nods his head in something almost like a bow before turning gracefully on his heel and heading out to the lobby. Didn't take you to be the easily spooked type, Marco, Chandrash calls after him, but Marco does not turn. Marco politely dismisses the illusionists in the lobby, explaining that the position has been filled and thanking them for their time. None of them notice that his hands are shaking, or that he is clutching the pen in his hand so tightly that his knuckles are white. Nor do they notice when it snaps in two within his fist, black ink seeping down his wrist. After the illusionists have departed, Marco gathers his things, wiping his ink-covered hand on his black coat. He puts on his bowler hat before he exits the theatre. With every step, he grows more visibly distressed. People move out of his way on the crowded pavement. When he reaches his flat, Marco drops his bag to the floor, leaning against the door with a heavy sigh. What's wrong? Isabel asks from a chair next to the empty fireplace. She conceals the length of hair she has been braiding in her pocket, scowling as she knows she will have to rebraid the entire piece because her concentration was broken. It is the part she still has the most difficulty with, the concentration and focus. For now, she abandons it and watches Marco as he crosses the room to reach the bookcases lining the wall. I know who my opponent is, Marco says, pulling armfuls of books down from their shelves and spreading them out haphazardly over tables, leaving several in messy piles on the floor. Those remaining on the shelves collapse, a few volumes falling, but Marco does not seem to notice. Is it that Japanese woman you were so curious about? Isabel asks, watching as Marco's impeccable filing system falls into chaos. The flat has always been kept in perfect order, and she finds the sudden upheaval disquieting. No, Marco says as he flips through pages. It's Prospero's daughter. Isabel picks up a potted violet that has toppled in the wake of the falling books and places it back on the shelf. Prospero, she asks, the magician, the one you saw in Paris? Marco nods. I didn't know he had a daughter, she says. I was unaware of that fact myself, Marco says, discarding one book and picking up another. Chandresh just hired her to be the illusionist for the circus. Really? Isabel asks. Marco does not respond. So she'll be doing what you said he did? Actual magic disguised as stage illusions? Did she do that at the audition? Yes, she did, Marco says, without looking up from his books. She must be very good. She's too good, Marco says, pulling another shelf worth of books from their resting places and moving them to the table, the violet and innocent victim once more. This could be extremely problematic, he says, almost to himself. A pile of notebooks slips from the table to the floor in a flurry of fluttering pages and a sound like the wings of birds. Isabel retrieves the violet again, placing it across the room. Does she know who you are? She asks. I do not believe so, Marco says. Does this mean the circus is part of the challenge? Isabel asks. Marco stops flipping through pages and looks up at her. It must, he says before he returns his attention to the book. That's likely why I was sent to work for Chandresh, so I would already be involved. The circus is the venue. Is that good? Isabel asks, but Marco does not answer, lost in the flood of paper and ink again. With one hand, he fidgets with the cloth of the other sleeve. A splatter of black ink stains the white cuff. She changed the fabric, he mutters to himself. How did she change the fabric? Isabel moves a pile of abandoned books to the desk where her Marseille deck rests. She looks up at Marco, who is now deeply engrossed in a particular volume. She quietly spreads the cards out in a long line across the desk. Keeping her eyes on Marco, she draws a single card. She flips it over on the desk and looks down to see what her cards have to say about the matter. A man stands between two women, a cherub with bow and arrow hovering over their heads. L'amoureux, the lovers. Is she pretty? Isabel asks. Marco does not answer. She pulls another card from the line and lays it atop the first. La Maison Dieu. She frowns at the picture of the crumbling tower and the falling figure. She returns both cards to the deck, pushing it back into an orderly stack. Is she stronger than you? Isabel asks. Again, Marco fails to answer, flipping through the pages of a notebook. For years, he has felt reasonably well prepared. Practicing with Isabel has proved an advantage, enabling him to improve aspects of his illusions to the point where, even with her familiarity, she cannot always discern what is real. But faced with his opponent, his feelings about the challenge have suddenly changed, replaced by nerves and confusion. He had half expected he would simply know what to do when the time came. And he had entertained the thought that the time might never come, that the promise of the game was something to motivate his studies and nothing more. So the competition will begin when the circus opens then? Isabel asks him. He had almost forgotten she was there. I suppose that would be logical, Marco says. I don't understand how we are meant to compete when the circus is going to travel, and I must remain in London. I shall have to do everything remotely. I could go, Isabel says. What? Marco asks, looking up at her again. You said the circus still needs a fortune teller, didn't you? I could read my cards. I haven't read for anyone but myself, but I am getting better at it. I could write you letters when the circus is away. It would give me some place to go if you're not supposed to have me here while you play the game. I'm not sure that's a good idea, Marco says, though he cannot articulate why. He has never considered the possibility of involving Isabel in his life outside the bounds of the flat. He had been keeping her separate from Chandrash and the circus, both to have something of his own and because it seemed appropriate, especially given his instructor's vague advice about the matter. Please, Isabel says, this way I can help you. Marco hesitates, glancing down at his books. His thoughts remain preoccupied with the image of the girl from the theatre. It will help you be closer to the circus, Isabel continues, and it will give me something to do for the duration of your challenge. When it's done, I can come back to London. I'm not even certain how the challenge is going to work, Marco says. But you're certain that I can't stay here during it? She asks. Marco sighs. They have discussed it before, not in any great detail, but enough to establish that when the game began, she would have to leave. I am already so busy working for Chandrash, and I will need to focus on the competition without distraction, he says, using his instructor's choice of word from an order disguised as a suggestion. He is not certain which option bothers him more, involving Isabel in the game or relinquishing the one relationship in his life that has not been dictated for him. This way I wouldn't be a distraction. I'd be helping, Isabel says. And if you're not supposed to have help, well, I'd only be writing you letters. What's wrong with that? It seems like a perfect solution to me. I could arrange for you to meet with Chandrash, Marco suggests. You could convince him to hire me, couldn't you? Isabel asks, if he needs convincing. Marco nods, still not entirely certain about the idea, but almost desperate for some kind of strategy, a tactic to use in dealing with his newly revealed opponent. He turns her name over and over in his mind. What is Prospero's daughter named? Isabel asks, as though she can tell what he is thinking. Bowen, Marco says. Her name is Celia Bowen. It's a pretty name, Isabel says. Is something wrong with your hand? Marco looks down, surprised to find that he has been holding his right hand in his left, unconsciously stroking the empty space where a ring was once burned into his skin. No, he says, picking up a notebook to occupy his hands. It's nothing. Isabel seems satisfied with the response, lifting a pile of fallen books from the floor and stacking them on the desk. Marco is relieved that she does not have the skill to pull the memory of the ring from his mind.
You so good.
Getting interesting.
Like, how do you make your laptop make noises?
X function and that.
Thank you, Frankie.
What's that, darling?
I said thank you.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. Did you enjoy that?
Very much.
So nice.
That was fun.
Much enjoyed.
I was really wishing I could see that clock in real
No
life.
spoilers. Yeah, me too. I just joined for the chat.
What?
What?
Wait, we're not allowed to discuss the book because other people are in for the chat and don't want any spoilers.
I just wanted to talk about the book. Oh no.
Oh.
Can I make a non-spoilery comment?
I was going to say, can you talk about it without spoiling it?
You can tantalize us.
I will. There's some music in the background. I'm finding this is a very different book from the Chocolat, where immediately it was all about, like, you knew who the characters were almost within a few seconds of meeting them. Yeah. Like, you know, it's like, you're this, you're this. In this, I'm like, what do people want? What are they doing? What even is the challenge? Yes. Is it just, are they just going to do a dance off? Are they going to kill each other? It's so, there's creepy people, but are they, what? It's just.
It is a dance off.
Yeah. Spoilers. No spoilers.
Also, anyone who hasn't listened to tonight's, can you block your ears for 10 seconds while I hold up my hand and say something, and I'll drop my hand when I've finished the sentence.
That's a good plan.
Good idea.
Okay, I'm going to say it now. But yeah, I don't know about anyone else, but I am hoping that Isabel and Celia meet and flirt a lot. Like a lot. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's just where I want it to go. Okay.
Well, you know, Gordon, if it doesn't, you can write the fanfic.
Narrated by you know who.
Malcolm, obviously.
Go Malcolm.
Go Malcolm. Go Malcolm.
Then we may begin.
Has everyone seen the fanfic that's being written at the moment?
There's probably some clueless people.
I mean, I've read some of it, but I'm not like up to date.
Have you not listened to Malcolm's recordings?
No, I've not listened.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Malcolm, say the thing again. Say the thing that I like again.
Dance, monkey, dance.
That is what it feels like, but
Please.
good afternoon.
Oh.
I thought it was going to be the Biscoff paste bit.
That's a different thing.
Like,
So I want Biscoff paste.
Oh. Oh.
What's on your neck, Frankie?
Jesus. Yeah.
Oh.
Ouch. Oh.
That's not a spine. That's a pile of biscuits.
It's
Have you been a contortionist?
Help me.
Have you
Suki,
eaten dinner today, Frankie?
What's that, darling?
Have you eaten dinner today?
Yes.
Good. Yesterday you hadn't.
she's lying.
Oh right. Oh, I was like, does your neck crack extra lots when you haven't eaten dinner?
You don't know that?
I mean, I'm not a neckologist, but that doesn't sound right to me.
As a
Yes,
qualified
I have
necologist,
had dinner. I had a stir fry. It was very nice. Thank you.